Welcome to Communicate to Lead, the podcast that empowers leaders and aspiring leaders to communicate with clarity and impact. I'm Keely Belton, CEO and successful entrepreneur, and your host for today. I'm here to equip you with all the essential tools and strategies to master effective communication and lead your team to success. As the founder and CEO of The Tailored Approach, my goal is to empower you to be the best leader you can be. So sit back, relax, and join me in today's episode as we dive into the art of communicating like a true leader. Be yourself. Bring your whole self to work. Authentic leadership is effective leadership. We've all heard these mantras. But what happens when showing up as your authentic self feels like putting a target on your back? What do you do when the very qualities that make you unique also make you vulnerable? Hey there, welcome back to Communicate to Lead. I'm your host, Keely Belton. In this episode, we're tackling a leadership challenge that keeps showing up in my conversations with women leaders across industries. The authenticity paradox, when being yourself feels too risky. For those of you listening from the United States, you're likely aware of the challenging moment we're experiencing in our leadership landscape with the recent policy shifts in the US federal government regarding DEI initiatives and the pressure on American corporations to scale back their diversity programs. Many women leaders here are feeling caught in a crossfire. And for my international listeners, I know many of you tune in from across the globe. While the specific political dynamics may differ in your country, the fundamental tensions between authenticity and professional expectations are universal. No matter where you lead, you might be wondering, is this the time to stand firm in my authentic leadership style? Or is this a moment to be more cautious? I've been hearing from so many women in my coaching practice who are wrestling with versions of this question. They are asking, how do I stay true to myself while navigating these shifting expectations? When does authenticity serve me, and when might it put me at risk? That's exactly what we're unpacking today. So grab your favorite beverage, find a quiet space, and let's dig in together. First, let's get clear on what we mean by authenticity in leadership. It's become such a buzzword, hasn't it? But at its core, authenticity in leadership means aligning your external actions and communications with your internal values, beliefs, and personality. It's about showing up as a whole person, not leaving essential parts of yourself at the door when you step into your leadership role. Authenticity isn't just about self-expression, though. It's about genuine connection. Harvard Business Review published research showing that leaders who bring appropriate vulnerability and transparency to their communications foster 42% more trust from their teams. When people sense you're operating behind a facade, they instinctively withhold trust. Think about leaders who've inspired you most deeply. I bet they showed you something real about themselves, something beyond the polished professional exterior. That revelation created a connection that purely transactional leadership never can. Research consistently shows us that authentic leadership builds trust. When your team sees consistency between what you say and what you do, when they feel they know the real you, they are more likely to trust your direction and commit to your vision. Authenticity also creates sustainable leadership because pretending to be someone you are not is exhausting. Trust me, I've tried, and maybe you have too. But here's where it gets tricky, especially for women leaders. We face what researchers call the double bind, that frustrating situation where we are damned if we do, damned if we don't. Show up direct and assertive, you might be labeled as aggressive or difficult. And if you show up as collaborative and relationship focused, then you might be seen as soft or not leadership material. A fascinating study from McKinsey found that women leaders who display traditionally masculine leadership traits like assertiveness are often rated 35% less likable than men displaying identical behaviors. Yet those same women who lean into more stereotypically feminine leadership qualities are rated 27% less competent. It's a nearly impossible balancing act. Then there's the code switching, that exhausting practice of adjusting your communication style, appearance, or behavior to fit the dominant culture. Many of us become experts at this, haven't we? Modulating our tone in meetings, adjusting how we dress, monitoring how much emotion we show, or even changing how we structure our sentences so we don't sound too feminine or too ethnic. That mental and emotional toll of this constant calculation is what researchers call identity labor, work that goes completely uncompensated and often unacknowledged, yet consumes significant cognitive resources that could otherwise be directed towards innovation, problem solving, and actual leadership. And for women of color, there's what I call the authenticity tax, the additional energy and calculation required to determine when and how much of your cultural identity is safe to express in predominantly white spaces. It's that constant internal dialogue of, can I wear my natural hair to the client meeting? Or should I share this perspective that comes from my cultural background? A study in the Journal of Business Ethics found that Black women leaders spend approximately 25% of their mental bandwidth on strategies to navigate stereotypes and bias, bandwidth that their white counterparts can dedicate entirely to their actual work. This represents a significant competitive disadvantage that has nothing to do with capability and everything to do with the environments we have created. All of this gets magnified in cultural and political contexts where inclusion initiatives are under scrutiny. Here in the United States, we're seeing DEI programs, the very initiatives designed to create more inclusive environments where authenticity can flourish, being challenged and rolled back at the federal level, with ripple effects throughout many American organizations. The cruel irony is that these pressures come precisely when research from firms like Deloitte shows that authenticity in leadership drives innovation. Teams led by leaders who encourage authentic expression are 35% more likely to report breakthrough innovations than teams where conformity is the norm. So that's the paradox. Authenticity is powerful and necessary for effective leadership. But for women, and especially women of color, being authentic can sometimes carry real professional risks. The very qualities that make you an exceptional and innovative leader might simultaneously trigger biases that undermine how your leadership is perceived. And this puts you, my listener, in a dilemma. Do you modify your authentic expression to avoid triggering stereotypes and biases? Or do you remain fully authentic and accept the potential career consequences? That's the authenticity paradox in action. Let me share a few real-world examples of what this looks like. Names have been changed, of course, but these are real situations from my coaching work. Take Jamie, a mid-level director in a technology company. She's naturally enthusiastic and expressive. It's part of what makes her a great motivator for her team. But in executive meetings, she's received feedback that she needs to be more measured and less emotional when presenting her ideas. She came to me frustrated, saying, if I strip away my passion when I'm communicating, I'm not being authentic. But if I show up as my full self, I'm not being taken seriously. What's happening here is what social scientists call emotional display rules, unwritten expectations about what emotions are appropriate in professional settings. And these rules are deeply engendered. A 2021 study from the Journal of Applied Psychology found that men who express anger in workplace settings are often perceived as passionate and committed, while women expressing identical emotions of passion and anger are judged as out of control or unprofessional. For Jamie, we worked on what I call authentic channeling, finding ways to express her natural enthusiasm in forms that wouldn't trigger gender bias. We practiced using precise language, backing passion with data, and strategically employing silence and pauses to create impact. She didn't dampen her authentic self. She just found new ways for it that would be received differently. Or consider May, who leads a team in finance. She comes from a cultural background that values group harmony and indirect communication. Her authentic style is to build consensus and approach disagreements diplomatically. But she's in an organization that rewards direct confrontation and individual achievement. She's constantly torn between honoring her cultural values and adapting to a company's expectations. What May faces is a classic cultural collision between collectivist and individualist values. Western corporate culture, particularly in the United States, is built on what we call individualist foundations that prize direct communication, self-promotion, and immediate action. Yet many global cultures and many women across cultures are socialized to value relationship harmony, contextual communication, and collaborative achievement. With May, we identified what I call her non-negotiable authenticity markers, the cultural values that were core to her identity and leadership philosophy. For her, these included deep listening and relationship investment. Then we found ways to honor these while adapting her communication style to be more direct when needed. She began prefacing important points with phrases like, "I'd like to offer a direct perspective on this," which signal both her cultural adaptability and her intention to speak plainly. Then there's Tanya, a Black woman who recently stepped into a C-suite role at a US company with federal government contracts. She told me about a meeting where diversity initiatives were being discussed, and she wanted to share her personal experiences with racial bias in the workplace. But given the current American political climate and her company's relationships with the government agencies, she was concerned that speaking too frankly might put a target on her back. So she held back and later on told me she felt she had betrayed herself by staying silent. Tanya's situation highlights what researchers call covering, downplaying aspects of your identity to avoid discrimination or discomfort. A landmark study by Deloitte found that 61% of employees cover aspects of their identity at work, but this number jumps to 79% for Black women. The exhaustion and moral injury of this constant self-editing represents a significant drain on talent and innovation. For Tanya, we developed a strategy of strategic truth-telling, identifying forums where her authentic experiences could be shared with meaningful impact, but reduce risk. She created a mentoring circle for women of color in her organization, where authentic conversations could happen in a safer space. And she found external speaking opportunities where she could share her full experiences without the same corporate constraints. I faced similar tensions myself. Last year, I was facilitating a leadership workshop for a conservative client. During a discussion about inclusive communication, an executive made a dismissive comment about pronouns. My authentic response would have been to challenge this directly, but I knew that my approach might shut down the entire conversation and undermine my broader goals. So instead, I redirected the conversation to the business case for inclusive language, saving the more direct feedback for a private conversation later. What I was practicing was what researchers call tempered radicalism, the art of creating change from within systems by balancing challenge with acceptance. It's finding that sweet spot between being so authentic that you are rejected by the system versus being so adapted that you reinforce the very problems you are trying to change. In my case, I made the strategic choice to temporarily focus on inclusive language as a business advantage rather than a moral imperative. This allowed me to keep the executive engaged while still advancing the ultimate goal of more inclusive communication. In a private conversation later, I was more direct about the impact of dismissive comments on team, psychological safety, and belonging. I made that choice strategically, but I did wonder afterwards, did I compromise my authenticity? Or did I just express it in a way that was contextually more appropriate? This points to another dimension of the authenticity paradox, the internal dialogue that happens when we make these strategic choices. When we question ourselves, am I being true to my values? Am I being courageous enough? This self-questioning can be another form of emotional labor that drains our energy and confidence. That's why I believe we need to expand our definition of authenticity beyond self-expression. True authenticity includes alignment with our deeper purpose and values, even when the expression of those values must be strategic and contextual. That's the thing about authenticity. It's not as simple as just be yourself. The question becomes, which aspects of myself should I express in this context And how can I do it in a way that serves both my integrity and my effectiveness? So how do we navigate this paradox? Let me share a framework I call the authentic leadership spectrum. First, let's throw out the binary thinking. Authenticity is not an all or nothing state. It exists on a spectrum. On one hand is unfiltered authenticity, sharing every thought, emotion, and reaction exactly as you experience it. On the other end is complete adaptation, where you shape everything about yourself to meet external expectations. Neither extreme serves you well as a leader. The sweet spot? Strategic authenticity, being true to your core values and personality while making thoughtful choices about how you express them in different contexts. Think of it like music. A skilled musician doesn't play every note at the same volume. They modulate, sometimes play softly, sometimes boldly, but they're always playing their unique song. The music remains authentic, even when the expression varies. What I find fascinating is how this musical analogy is supported by neuroscience. When we are authentic in ways that connect rather than alienate, our brains release oxytocin, the bonding hormone, which actually enhances trust and cooperation. But when we trigger threat responses in others through expressions that violate expected norms, their amygdalas activate, essentially shutting down the very connection we're hoping to create. The key insight here is that authenticity isn't simply about self-expression. It's about creating the conditions for genuine connection and impact. Sometimes that means strategically adapting how we express our authentic selves. Let me share 3 strategies for navigating the spectrum effectively. Strategy 1 is what I call practice strategic vulnerability. Vulnerability can be a powerful leadership tool, but it requires discernment. You have to be careful. And here's my rule of thumb. Share vulnerabilities that humanize you without undermining critical perceptions of your competence. For example, it might be authentic to say that you're nervous about a major presentation. That can create connection with your team. But in environments where your expertise is already questioned, which happens disproportionately to women and especially women of color, you might choose to share that vulnerability with a trusted colleague rather than your entire team. Brené Brown's research on vulnerability highlights an important distinction. Vulnerability is not the same as oversharing. True vulnerability is selective and purposeful. It's opening up about challenges you've processed sufficiently to derive meaning from, not emotional dumping of raw, unprocessed feelings. Here's a practical exercise I use with my coaching clients called the vulnerability matrix. Draw a 2x2 matrix. The horizontal axis represents potential for connection going from left to right, so that would be low to high. The vertical axis represents risk to credibility, low to high. Before sharing something vulnerable, place it on the matrix. High connection, if something has high connection, low risk, share it broadly. Share it with everybody. If something is high connection, high risk, decide to share it selectively with trusted allies. And if something is low connection, low risk, consider whether it serves a purpose and whether you should share it at all. And then finally, if something is low connection, high risk, rather keep that private because that might get you in trouble. So ask yourself, what's my purpose in sharing this vulnerability? Who needs to hear it? What's the potential impact? Then decide if, when, and with whom you want to share that. Here's strategy number 2. Use values-based decision-making. When facing an authenticity dilemma, let your core values be your compass. Start by getting clear on your non-negotiable values, the principles that define who you are as a leader. For me, those values are integrity, courage, and compassion. When I face a situation where I'm unsure how authentic to be, I ask myself this question: what would integrity look like here? What would be the courageous choice to be? How can I approach this with compassion for myself and others? This doesn't always give you an easy answer, but it ensures that even when you're adapting your communication style, you're still acting from your authentic core. Research from Harvard Business Review shows that leaders who make decisions aligned with their core values experience 41% less decision fatigue and demonstrate greater resilience during organizational change. Why? Because value alignment reduces cognitive dissonance, that uncomfortable mental state of acting in ways that contradict our beliefs. Here's a practical tool I call the 3 circles of authenticity that has helped many women leaders. Draw 3 concentric circles on a page. In the innermost circle, write your non-negotiable values and aspects of your identity, things you will not compromise regardless of your context. In the middle circle, write elements that you're willing to adapt in their expression but not in their essence. And then in the outer circle, write down aspects that you're comfortable fully adapting to different contexts. Let me give you an example. Say you're in a meeting where a colleague makes a subtle sexist comment. We've been in those meetings, haven't we? Your authentic reaction might be anger. If you express that anger directly, you might reinforce stereotypes about emotional women. If you say nothing, you might feel you've compromised your values. A values-based approach might be different, and it might lead you to calmly name the issue. And you could say something like, that comment landed as dismissive of women's contributions, or to address it privately later. Either way, you are honoring your value of standing up for equality, but choosing how to express it based on the context. I worked with a leader named Elena, who valued directness and honesty above everything else. When her company began implementing policies she believed were harmful to employee well-being, she faced a dilemma. Rather than either silently complying, which would have violated her core values, or bluntly criticizing leadership, which potentially could damage her effectiveness, she found a third way. She created an anonymous feedback channel where employees could share concerns, then presented the aggregated data to leadership with proposed solutions. Her value of honesty remained intact, but her expression of it was strategic. So that's the second strategy, using values-based decision-making. And here's the third strategy, building authentic communication habits. Authenticity becomes easier when you develop consistent communication practices that express your leadership style while meeting professional expectations. Here are 3 habits to cultivate. First, develop confident uncertainty. Practice phrases like, I don't have all the answers, but here's my current thinking. Or, I'm still forming my view on this, but I'm leaning towards ... These allow you to be honest about uncertainty while still projecting confidence. Research from Columbia Business School shows that leaders who acknowledge uncertainty in specific, bounded ways are rated 26% more trustworthy than those who project false certainty. The key is to express uncertainty not as a global self-doubt, but as a thoughtful engagement with complexity. Secondly, create authentic framing. When you need to adapt your natural style, frame it transparently. For example, I want to approach this systematically, so I've prepared detailed notes even though I usually communicate more spontaneously. This helps others understand your authentic self, even when you are adapting your style. I call this meta communication, talking about how you're talking. I know, sounds a little all kinds of circles, but it's particularly useful for women of color who frequently face pressure to code switch. By occasionally naming what you're doing, I'm going to be very direct here with you. That's the comment. You are helping others correctly interpret your communication while honoring your authentic style. Thirdly, build a personal board of directors, trusted colleagues or mentors with whom you can completely be authentic. These relationships give you space to process challenges and show up as your full self, making it easier to navigate situations when you need to be more strategic about your authenticity. A study from the Center for Creative Leadership found that leaders with at least 3 diverse truth tellers in their network were 40% more likely to navigate complex ethical dilemmas successfully and with less personal stress. These relationships provide not just emotional support, but cognitive diversity that helps you see multiple perspectives. One of my clients, let's call her Jasmine, created what she calls authenticity anchors throughout her week. A mentor meeting on Monday, a peer lunch on Wednesdays, and a reflectional journal on Fridays. These regular practices provided space for her to reconnect with her authentic self, particularly when she's navigating challenging workplace dynamics. What's powerful about these 3 strategies is that they work even in environments that are becoming less supportive of diversity and inclusion. They are about finding ways to honor your authentic self while strategically navigating complex professional landscapes. And the research isn't clear on this. Authenticity isn't simply good for you, it's good for business. A comprehensive study from McKinsey shows that companies with most psychologically safe cultures, where people feel they can show up authentically, outperform their competitors on innovation, productivity, and employee retention. But the path to creating those cultures requires both individual and systemic work. While we can't always change our environments overnight, you and I both know that, we can develop practices that allow us to bring more of our authentic selves to leadership while navigating the very real constraints and biases that exist. Strategic authenticity isn't about compromising who you are. It's about becoming more skilled at expressing who you are in ways that create meaningful impact. Now, let's make this practical. I want to give you 3 actionable steps you can apply to this framework in your leadership journey. Number 1, complete an authenticity audit. Do it this week. Here's what you need to do. Identify one authenticity tension you are currently experiencing. Where do you feel pressure to be less than fully authentic? Write it down and then consider the following. Is this a situation that calls for more strategic authenticity? Which of your core values are at stake here? Take 10 minutes with a journal and map out where the tension falls on your authenticity spectrum. Is it something core to your identity that needs protecting? Or is it a preference that you can adapt while remaining true to yourself? Understanding the nature of the tension is your first step toward resolving it. Number 2, create your values-based decision tree. Do this in the next 2 weeks. Set aside 30 minutes to identify your 3 to 5 core leadership values. For each one, write down how it might look like when expressed directly versus strategically. Create a simple decision tree that helps you determine where to adapt your expression versus where to stand firm. For example, if one of your values is honesty, your decision tree might include questions like, will direct honesty in this moment build or damage trust? And can I express this truth in a way that honors both my integrity and the relationship? This tool becomes your compass for navigating authenticity dilemmas with greater confidence and less second guessing. That brings us to strategy number 3. Build your authenticity support system. Do this in the next 30 days. Identify at least 3 people who can serve on your personal board of directors, trusted allies with whom you can be fully authentic. Schedule regular check-ins with these individuals to process challenges, receive honest feedback, and reconnect with your authentic self. Be intentional about diversity in this group. Look for perspectives that complement yours rather than simply reinforcing it. Include at least one person who understands your industry but isn't directly connected to your workplace, giving you the benefit of both relevant insight and objective distance. Your reflection question for this week is, what aspect of my authentic leadership style am I holding back that might actually be my greatest strength? Sometimes the very qualities we're hesitant to express, our empathy, our directness, our cultural perspective, are exactly what our organizations need most. Remember that developing strategic authenticity is not a destination, but it's a practice. And like any skill, it improves with conscious attention and repetition. The goal isn't perfection, but progress, becoming incrementally more skilled at expressing your true self in ways that create maximum positive impact. I would love to hear how these exercises work for you. Send me a message on LinkedIn or Instagram to share your insights or questions. As we wrap up today, I want to leave you with this thought. Navigating the authenticity paradox is not about finding a perfect solution. It's about making conscious choices rather than defaulting to adaptation or letting unfiltered reactions drive your leadership. The strategic authenticity framework we will explore today, understanding the spectrum, practicing strategic vulnerability, and using values-based decision-making give you tools to navigate the complex terrain more effectively. Remember that the goal isn't to be perfectly authentic in every situation. That is simply not possible in our complex professional environments. The goal is to be intentional about how you express your authentic self, making choices that honor your core values while maximizing your leadership impact. And yes, many of us are navigating challenging environments for diverse leadership styles, whether due to political shifts like those we're seeing in the US or the universal biases that exist in organizations worldwide. But remember, authenticity has power precisely because it's uncommon. When you find ways to bring your true self to your leadership, even strategically, you create spaces for others to do the same. And that impact can transform cultures and even in resistant environments. I hope the authenticity audit, values-based decision tree, and authenticity support system I shared today give you practical ways to begin this journey. Start with just one of these 3 tools and notice how it shifts your leadership presence. If you found today's episode helpful, would you take a moment to share it with another leader who might benefit? We navigate these challenges better when we do it together. Until next week, my friend, I am Keely, reminding you that great communication is the foundation of inspiring leadership. Keep learning, keep growing, and remember to communicate to lead.